The office was supposed to be a fortress of German corporate efficiency. But on June 18, 2020, the fortress didn't fall. It evaporated. Thousands of employees walked into Wirecard headquarters that morning, believing they worked for one of Europe's greatest technology success stories. By sunset, that belief was gone.
Wirecard has been arrested on suspicion of falsifying accounts.
Auditors had just revealed that 1.9 billion euros, nearly a quarter of the company's entire balance sheet, could not be confirmed. The money wasn't stolen, it wasn't transferred, it wasn't misplaced. According to investigators, the money was never there. For years, investors trusted the numbers, regulators trusted management, auditors trusted the documents, and the market trusted the story. But beneath the growth, the awards, and the billion-dollar valuation, one question had quietly gone unanswered. Who actually verified the evidence? Because this isn't just the story of a missing 1.9 billion euros. This is the story of how an entire system, auditors, regulators, investors, executives, looked at something that wasn't there and chose to believe it anyway. Tonight, we open the Wirecard file.
When most people hear the name Wirecard today, they think of fraud. But that's not how this story started. To understand why so many intelligent people trusted this company, bankers, analysts, regulators, fund managers, you have to understand the moment it arrived. It was 1999. The internet was changing everything. Shopping was moving online. Businesses were going digital, and every online transaction created a new problem. How do you move money safely between buyers and sellers who may never meet? Wirecard claimed it had the answer. As e-commerce expanded, so did Wirecard. New customers, new markets, revenue climbing, a stock price following. To investors, it looked like a company riding one of the biggest technological shifts of the modern era. And for Germany, a country known for engineering, for manufacturing, for industrial giants, but with very few homegrown technology success stories, Wirecard represented something even bigger. By the late 2000s, executives were being praised. Analysts were issuing glowing reports. Investors were pouring in capital. Confidence became self-reinforcing. The more successful Wirecard appeared, the more people believed it deserved that success. In 2018, Wirecard joined the DAX, the 30 most valuable publicly traded companies in Germany. For many investors, that wasn't just recognition, it was proof. Proof that Wirecard belonged among Germany's corporate elite. Proof that the business was real. But hidden inside that logic was a very dangerous assumption. The assumption that success itself is evidence. It isn't. A rising stock price isn't evidence. Awards aren't evidence. Media praise isn't evidence. Evidence is evidence. And the people whose job it was to find that evidence were already starting to ask uncomfortable questions. Long before Wirecard collapsed, the warning signs were already there. Not inside secret government files, not inside hidden databases. In public, journalists had questions, employees had concerns, whistleblowers were raising alarms. Among the most persistent voices was a Financial Times reporter named Dan McCrum. As he and his colleagues examined Wirecard's operations, they kept finding inconsistencies, questions about accounting, questions about overseas operations, transactions that seemed impossible to explain. Each article triggered denials. Each new question was met with resistance. But something troubling happened. The debate shifted. Instead of asking whether the allegations were true, people started questioning the motives of the people raising them. Were the journalists biased? Were investors trying to profit from a falling stock price? Were critics trying to damage a great company? The messenger became the story. And that is where organizations make their most dangerous mistake. Because when attention shifts from the evidence to the people presenting it, the actual questions go unanswered. The stock price kept climbing. Investors kept buying. Management kept reassuring the market. And every year that passed made Wirecard look more legitimate. After all, if there was really a problem, wouldn't someone have found it by now? That assumption would eventually cost billions, because healthy organizations investigate allegations.
Unhealthy ones investigate critics. And the moment an organization becomes more interested in defending its reputation than testing its assumptions, risk begins to compound quietly in the background.
By this point, Wirecard had a different kind of defense. Not the lawyers, not the PR team, complexity. Because when a business is complicated enough, people stop asking simple questions. And the simplest question of all was the one nobody could answer. Where was the money actually coming from? Wirecard claimed that a large portion of its revenue didn't come from Germany or Europe or any market investors could easily observe. Instead, it came from something called third-party partners. These partners supposedly processed payments on Wirecard's behalf in countries where Wirecard didn't have licenses. On paper, it sounded like a clever strategy for international expansion. In practice, it created a black box. The transactions happened somewhere else. The cash was supposedly held somewhere else, and verification depended on information from people outside Wirecard's direct control. So the story went like this. A merchant in Asia runs a transaction. A third-party partner processes it. Wirecard earns a fee. The partner holds the cash. Wirecard records the revenue. Simple on paper, but here's the problem. Nobody outside the company could see these partners. Not the auditors, not the regulators, not the investors. Wirecard said the partners existed. Wirecard said the revenue existed. Wirecard said the cash existed. And because the structure was so complex, most people accepted the explanation. Complexity became camouflage. Because here's what nobody likes to admit in a boardroom, or an audit firm, or a regulatory body. Sometimes, people are afraid to ask basic questions. Because asking basic questions means admitting you don't fully understand what you're looking at. And once nobody is willing to do that, weak controls don't just survive, they thrive. Which brings us to the only question that actually mattered. Where was the money? By 2020, the questions surrounding Wirecard could no longer be ignored. The warnings had accumulated, the journalists had published, the whistleblowers had spoken. Investigators needed an answer to a very simple question. Not projected revenue, not future earnings, not business forecasts. Cash. Real cash. According to Wirecard, nearly 1.9 billion euros was sitting safely inside trust accounts. The company said the money existed. The challenge was proving it. Think of it this way. If a friend tells you they have $100,000 in a bank account, you don't verify that by asking your friend. You verify it by asking the bank. Independent confirmation. Simple, objective, reliable. The same principle applies in auditing. If a company claims cash exists, eventually somebody needs to verify it directly with the institution holding the money, not through presentations, not through management explanations, not through assumptions, through evidence. And when investigators finally sought that confirmation, something extraordinary happened. The banks could not confirm the balances. The accounts could not be verified. And suddenly, one of Europe's most celebrated companies was facing a devastating possibility. What if the money was never there? For years, investors believed the cash existed. For years, analysts believed the cash existed. For years, the market moved forward. Now the foundation beneath that belief was collapsing. Because when trust and evidence finally collide, evidence always wins, and reality had arrived. Within days, the market had its answer. The money could not be verified. Confidence evaporated. The stock price collapsed. Billions in market value disappeared. The company filed for insolvency. Employees who believed they were building one of Europe's most successful technology companies suddenly found themselves working for a bankrupt organization. Investors who had trusted the financial statements watched their holdings go to zero. Corporate scandals are often measured in billions. But behind every billion are people who accepted jobs, people who invested savings, people who trusted the system. The numbers were staggering, but the loss of trust was even larger. At this point, the obvious question wasn't whether Wirecard had committed fraud. The obvious question was how the fraud survived. Because Wirecard wasn't operating in secret, it was a publicly traded company, subject to audits, subject to regulation, subject to scrutiny. And yet, for nearly a decade, financial statements were signed off, year after year. Investors relied on them. The company kept growing. Meanwhile, journalists kept asking questions. Whistleblowers kept raising concern. Evidence kept accumulating. That raises an uncomfortable question. If reporters working with limited resources could identify warning signs, why wasn't the broader system reacting more aggressively? The purpose of an audit is not to predict the future. It is to challenge assumptions, to test evidence, to verify claims. Yet somehow, the most important claim in the entire company, does this money actually exist, went unresolved for years. Most major failures don't happen because information is unavailable. They happen because assumptions become accepted as facts. And once enough people accept an assumption, challenging it becomes uncomfortable, especially when billions of dollars depend on it remaining true. Perhaps the most controversial aspect of the Wirecard saga wasn't the fraud itself, it was the response to the warning. At various points, attention appeared to focus more on the critics, the journalists, the short sellers, than on the questions they were raising. The alarm bell was receiving more scrutiny than the fire itself, and when that happens, risk doesn't disappear, it grows. As investigators tried to understand how billions of euros could vanish from one of Europe's largest companies, another mystery was unfolding. His name was Jan Marsalek, Wirecard's chief operating officer, a senior executive who had spent years helping oversee the company's international operations. If anyone understood how the system worked, it was him. But as the scandal exploded, Marsalek didn't stay to answer questions. He left. In the days following Wirecard's collapse, reports emerged that Marsalek had boarded a flight and disappeared. Authorities launched investigations. Intelligence agencies became interested. Rumors spread across Europe. Years later, parts of the story remain unclear, but one fact is not. While investors searched for answers, while employees searched for jobs, while regulators searched for explanations, one of the most important people in the entire scandal was gone. The company disappeared, the money disappeared, and the executive closest to both disappeared as well. At first glance, Wirecard looks like a fraud story. A company lied, executives misled investors, billions vanished. But that's not what makes this case matter. Fraud exists in every market. The real question, the one that should keep you up at night, is why the fraud survived. Because the warnings existed, the journalists existed, the whistleblowers existed. The evidence was not hidden. Much of it was sitting in plain sight. And yet the system continued moving forward. Investors assumed auditors had verified the numbers. Auditors assumed the evidence supported the claims. Regulators assumed the controls were functioning. The market assumed someone, somewhere, had already checked. That assumption, the belief that someone else had already done the verification, that was the real vulnerability. Wirecard wasn't ultimately destroyed by missing money. It was destroyed by missing verification. The fraud survived because every layer of oversight assumed another layer was doing the work. And when reality finally arrived, the entire structure collapsed at once. A company worth billions disappeared. Trust disappeared. Careers disappeared. And for one executive, even his whereabouts disappeared. This wasn't just a fintech failure. This wasn't just an audit failure. This was a verification failure. In procurement, auditing, compliance, investing, and even everyday business, the fastest way to create risk is to assume someone else already verified the evidence. And the reason the Wirecard story still matters, the reason we're still talking about it, is because the conditions that made it possible haven't gone away. They never do. If this case taught us anything, it's that fraud doesn't survive because information is hidden. It survives because warnings are ignored. If you want to go deeper on the frameworks behind this case, the slides are available to download below. Subscribe and join us for the next case file. Because Wirecard wasn't the first verification failure we've examined, and it certainly won't be the last. Next time, we investigate Northvolt, a company that raised billions to build Europe's battery future, then discovered that scaling a vision is much harder than selling one. Until then, this is The Auditor, and this file is closed.